morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to another HRO Today educational podcast. Today, we're going to talk about trends in the managed service provider marketplace, particularly contingent labor. In the wake of the global pandemic, we've seen lots of workforce trends changing, and we were curious. How is the world of contingent labor being affected by things like remote work? How is it being affected by the rebuilding of the global economy after a considerable slowdown? So today we're going to be asking an expert about that. I'm Elliot Clark, the CEO of HRO Today. We publish HRO Today Magazine, HRO Today EMEA, and HRO Today APAC. We are the producers of the HRO Today forums and educational events held around the world, and the managers of the HRO Today Association. Our guest today is Jim Burke. He is literally the man who brought logic to chaos. He is the CEO of Workforce Logiq, which has historically been one of the most highly rated MSP providers on the HRO Today Baker's Dozen. And I say he brought logic to chaos because Workforce Logiq, for those of you who are not HR news junkies, is the Zero Chaos company. 2 years ago, they changed their name from Zero Chaos to Workforce Logiq. Jim Burke is a veteran of many technology companies where he has been CEO. And his presence at a company like Workforce Logiq is also validation of how important technology is to the provision and management of contingent labor. So Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Elliot. That was one of the best intros I've had because I think it's the only time someone has said I've brought logic to chaos. It frequently gets inverted, so thank you.
All right. Well, now you guys have done well. So just for the sake of our audience, why don't you give your perspective on some of the highlights of Workforce Logiq and then talk about the marketplace?
Sure. So Workforce Logiq is a global MSP with a proprietary technology that we use to help our clients source and manage talent. We work with more than 8,000 suppliers, and we help clients in more than 50 countries. And as you mentioned, we've done well in the HRO Today's Baker's Dozen, including the #1 ranking last year, and very pleased to speak with you.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad you worked in that. You guys were #1 last year. I wanted to give you that opportunity. So, as a global provider, I think you guys are in more than 50 countries, right, providing service. So I'm going to ask this question in the context of the global pandemic, right? So in the wake of this global pandemic, we've seen companies all over the world navigate to remote work. In spite of layoffs in some industries, there are industries like healthcare and life science and technology that are just really cranking hard and incredibly busy. And even these companies have increased their contingent labor in spite of being remote. And other companies continue to be remote and will be for some time. So how has this move to remote work, and we're going to come back out of some, but I don't think all of it. How has that impacted how they contract and manage their contingent resources? And what do MSP providers such as Workforce Logiq had to do to service and to really adapt to the trend?
Yeah, great question. I think the move towards the acceptance of remote work is going to be, one of the more impactful outcomes of 2020. The other being a renewed focus on diversity and inclusion. And those two themes intersect in my mind. But specifically as it relates to remote work, it went mainstream for sure in 2020. And internally in our company, the future will not look like the past, but it certainly won't look like the present either. So remote work is here to stay, but where it makes sense and how it makes sense. And our job as an MSP is to advise clients, on where it makes sense and how it makes sense, and then to help them execute sourcing strategies. And so the two areas where we are very focused on working with our clients are, #1, with regard to diversity and inclusion, intersecting with remote work, as I mentioned. And so the remote work, by its very definition, allows us to reach out and find talent where it is. So we define diversity and inclusion in a number of different ways. One, ethnically. And so we now have the ability to reach out to people where they are and pull in diverse populations that may otherwise have been geographically excluded from top jobs. And so that's a huge benefit to companies, and it's a huge benefit to the cause of diversity and inclusion. We also think about D&I just from the perspective of neurodiversity and other facets of diversity, where we can get access to people and allow them to work in locations where they can thrive. And they can add tremendous value without having any physical constraints that may have been difficult in getting access to top jobs previously. So remote work and D&I, hand in hand as outcomes from 2020, I think are here to stay, and I think that's a good thing. From a more kind of pragmatic business perspective, remote work allows us to dramatically expand what I call the addressable market for talent. And so, talent that is in high demand and in short supply and traditionally has been expected to be on site in certain areas, obviously creates supply and demand imbalances, which work against a client's ability to source talent as quickly as possible and as less expensively as possible. If we can now identify talent wherever it is, we can dramatically increase the size of the addressable market of that talent and therefore get access to top talent in greater supply and therefore at lower cost and shorter times to fill. And so that clearly works in favor of the business goals of our clients. And so from both a social responsibility perspective as well as a business perspective, we expect remote is here to stay. It won't be all remote all the time for sure, but it will be remote as a component of a total talent plan for sure. And our job is to leverage our proprietary technology on behalf of our clients to do two things, really. One, identify where that talent is and the most effective means to engage that talent. And then the second thing is to actually engage that talent and source them, screen them, onboard them, handle all of their procurement needs, get them paid and compliant, and do all those things remotely. And we lean on our technology to do it. And I think, as we go forward, it will play an increasingly important part of total talent plan.
It's interesting. I totally agree with you about the remote work, that it certainly broadens the pool of talent, particularly in areas like technology, hard to fill type roles in programming or certain other engineering functions. Being able to have somebody who lives in Atlanta work for a company in the Bay Area versus having to move there makes some flexibility available that wasn't. You also mentioned D9. I think that's an interesting trend to discuss. Certainly it's in the national consciousness in the U.S. and we also saw across Europe. D&I has historically been something related more to permanent hiring. So are you seeing that a lot of your clients are becoming much more sensitive to the idea of making sure that both their perm and contingent workforces are following some kind of diversity goals? Because, it used to be the contingent workers, no one cared if they were diverse, and no one cared if they felt included. Are we seeing that start to move more in the direction? I mean, is that trend? It sounds to me like you're saying it's very palpable, but I just want to verify that.
In my perspective, it is absolutely the trend. And, I think the way we think about contingent work is changing. I think 5-10 years ago, for sure, it was largely viewed as a way to satisfy surges in need, temporary in its, traditional sense. And now I think that it is viewed as a necessary component of a total talent plan. And as it is increasingly viewed that way, one, it's going to be managed that way from a client's perspective. Two, there's going to be a set of expectations from a worker's perspective. And three, it's going to be regulated. And so I think over time, you're going to see the lines start to blur between those two traditional classifications of how work gets done. But that's a long-winded answer to a very direct question, which is yes, we are increasingly seeing our clients think about their contingent workers in similar ways as they think about the rest of their workforce. And that certainly extends to diversity and inclusion. We've seen D&I be a focus within supplier networks for a long time. It was just a natural progression to extending D&I into a focus into the worker population as well. And it just took some of the events of 2020 to accelerate that progress.
That's very interesting. And, we were also seeing, we talked about the remote workforce and the attitude that the employers have, but employees, a lot of times you see temporary labor, something that they would do if you go back 20 years. It was something you did contract between full-time jobs, right? You might be looking for a job, but you took a contract. Now with, for example, the millennial generation, there's proclivity toward contingent labor or consulting, and certainly older workers who may have retired out of the workforce or even just got tired of the cycle of layoffs and hires. So in the past, let's talk about how the economic factors are playing in. In past economic recoveries, companies were reluctant to rehire permanent workers early in the recovery. Are we seeing that again? And given some of the generational preferences now for contingent work arrangements, are you seeing that long-term trend toward an increasing percentage of the labor force becoming contingent in certain industries? I know you guys are very data-oriented. You're a whole bunch of math geeks, so you have access to a lot of the trends data. What are you seeing emerging from the patterns of usage in the last year, and how do you think that's going to change workforce planning in the future?
Yeah, so a great question. Actually, a couple of different questions in there. I think, Elliot, in terms of our employers bringing back full-time workers more slowly than contingent workers, coming out of the pandemic. And from our perspective, no. We've already seen the shift from oversupply to undersupply of talent, at least in certain skill sets, and expect that to continue. And so I think that employers are bringing back workers, as in many cases, at least. There's certainly going to be some sector differences and some company differences, but on balance, they're bringing back both full-time and contingent workers, as before. That said, we do see as a trend, contingent labor starting to grow as a total percentage of all labor, and that was not always the case. So it was always talked about as if that's the case, but the data didn't always show that was the case. And in fact, contingent labor as a percentage of total labor was relatively static for a while. It is starting to grow now as a percentage of total labor, and I think that's for two reasons. The demand side as well as the supply side. So on the demand side, as I mentioned previously, the way contingent labor is viewed is starting to change from surge capacity to a planful part of total talent. And that will only continue, given the discussion we just had on remote work and now getting access to high demand, short supply skill sets, wherever they may be, and doing so quicker and less expensively than employers were able to do before. So the demand side for contingent is increasing, but the supply side is increasing. And so we have an entire generation of new workers who are very focused on their experience more than their security. And we also have workers staying in the workforce longer. And as they do, increasingly looking for flexibility in how and when they work. And so those two populations of workers are, increasingly contingent by choice and, concentrating, as you might expect, in skill sets that are in the highest demand and the shortest supply. And so we absolutely expect that to continue. And there's some long-term implications that for employers, and we work with our clients in a number of different ways to advise them on those implications and get out in front of them. And so those implications would include, as an example, a focus on worker experience. So contingent workers now are exercising great choices for where they work and why. Increasing focus on what I'll call internal mobility, keeping contingent workers within your universe of workers and keeping them engaged, allowing them to move, from project-based work to other project-based work within your company so as to not lose them. Rethinking how work gets done and fragmenting jobs so that they can be done, in gigs, if you will, as opposed to, one person full time. These are trends that are going to continue. I think that they will ultimately create a more productive and more diverse workforce. And, the last trend that will lag behind but catch up is going to be regulation. And so, as more workers become contingent, as the nature of how work gets done continues to change and get fragmented, the location of where work gets done continues to change and frequently, will be sort of cross jurisdiction from the employer of record. We're going to have a host of regulatory complexity, which is going to be layered on top of it. And again, our job as an MSP on behalf of our clients is not only to help them source and manage their talent, but to advise them on how to be out in front of all of their goals, whether they be business goals, saving money, social responsibility goals, increasing diversity and inclusion, or regulatory goals, staying out of compliance trouble.
All right. You made some great points here. I think as the world is changing, there's a lot of compliance issues already that exist around worker classification, and I almost feel like the MSP providers need to include like the David Letterman kind of proviso before they chose stupid human trick all right, folks, don't try this yourselves at home. Got a lot of real expertise around dealing with some of these regulatory issues, which many talent acquisition groups don't necessarily have that native in-house or have the technology to do all the parsing and reporting. It's difficult, and it's coming. There's a lot of complexity to managing remote labor and co-employment issues and whatnot that companies need the advice and guidance of an external provider to be able to do effectively and also get the indemnity protection that is part of the service.
It is absolutely the case, Elliot. In any industry that relies heavily on technology, as our industry does, and we as a company put a really high degree of importance on the technology part of our services business. So we deliver a service, but we deliver it more effectively and more efficiently by leveraging our proprietary technology. We have 15 patents and patents pending collectively. So we continue to invest in and innovate our technology, and because we have to, in order to stay out in front of these trends on behalf of our clients. But industries that rely heavily on technology and industries that are heavily regulated, are the types of industries that lend themselves to a very focused outsourced partner. So this is not a part-time job for us. This is what we do. And the compliance end of the business is certainly increasing in importance. And I would also mention that worker experience end of the business is also increasing in importance and frequently overlooked. I think that an area of opportunity for many clients is really focusing on their brand as it relates to a work environment. The reputation that the business has as an employer for contract labor. Not only do you, from a labor perspective, you have a job, but do you have a job that you learn at, feel good at doing, feel fairly compensated for, with some flexibility to run your life the way you want. Those are a set of expectations that this next generation of skilled workers have. And employers, I think, in many ways are competing with one another, whether they know it or not, to create an environment where those short supply skilled labor want to go.
All great points. We could talk for a long time, but I want to be sensitive to our podcast listeners. You made some great points for the folks out there in our audience. You hear the trend of remote labor is definitely impacting the move toward an increasingly contingent workforce. It's allowing diversity and inclusion, as Jim said, in an opportunity, and something that more and more of your colleagues in the world are concerned about is their contingent workforce ascribing to the same diversity and inclusion principles that you aspire to throughout the rest of your permanent workforce and as a company, as well as through your vendor network. We're now going past the vendor networks into the workforce itself as a D&I issue. And then, I think that your comments about worker experience are absolutely spot on as being a big driver. And last but not least, watch for compliance. It's always sneaking up on you. Jim, thanks so much for all of this perspective from Workforce Logiq. Jim Burke is the CEO of Workforce Logiq, as he pointed out, the #1 rated managed service provider in our 2020 HRO Today Baker's Dozen Customer Satisfaction Survey. And I want to thank you for your time and your attention to the podcast, folks. I'm Elliot Clark, the CEO of HRO Today, and we'll look forward to you joining our next HRO Today educational podcast.